We cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters. Alexander Hamilton said, a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? Well, Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better red than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. This is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
Let's try that again. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Brian Lusk. I appreciate you being here today. Forgot I'd had my mic muted, but thank you for joining me. I do appreciate you being here. The principles spoken of in that talk are dear to me. It is the idea that some things are worth fighting for. Freedom is worth fighting for. Living on your knees is not the same as dying on your feet. And none should believe it otherwise, because there is no price too high to pay to ensure freedom and justice. Otherwise, what are we? So let's go ahead and get started on today's Ukraine update. Thank you again for joining me today. It's wanted to kind of open with something a little bit different so that we could have something to kind of start with, maybe kind of warm things up for the, kind of wait for things to get settled down in the video. Obviously, I need to work on one little minor detail there, and that is to make sure I've got my microphone unmuted at the right time. So let's go ahead and move on forward with today's Ukraine update. And the biggest news out of Ukraine today is that Volodymyr Zelensky supposedly, and this, I'm going to start by stating, this is false. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has denied this. But the reports that managed to come flittering out were that Zelensky had fired Zaluzhnyi as the general of the armed forces of Ukraine. This went wild on Ukrainian media. They even got to the point where they're saying Budanov was the replacement for Zaluzhnyi, that it was all good. Zelensky was just talking to allies before he actually carried it out, and that the order was already signed in the whole 9 yards. This has all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. The Institute for the Study of War states that the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense denied these rumors about the purported resignation or dismissal of Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhnyi on January 29th. It was reported by Ukrainian People's Deputy Oleksiy Honcharenko that Zaluzhnyi announced his resignation, but there is no decree yet. Lucille and Jerry, I highly encourage you to go ahead and bot back. You'll find, not wait till after, kind of wait till the stream winds down, but start over at the beginning, because that was Ronald Reagan's speech in 1964. I believe it was for supporting Barry Goldwater, as I recall. Yep, Barry Goldwater. And he talks about the value of freedom and peace through strength. A vital piece of what kept our world safe through the Cold War and into the uncertain days after the fall of the Soviet Union. So, moving back to Zaluzhnyi here. All these sources went absolutely bonkers talking about Zaluzhnyi possibly resigning or being forced out or all those types of things. But every time somebody jumped on it and said, I need a good source. But the sources all spoke on condition of anonymity. And they were providing contradicting responses. Then Zelensky's spokesperson stated that Zaluzhnyi was not dismissed. They were trying to confirm all day, and yet there was no dismissal, at least according to Zaluzhny's spokesperson. When President Zelensky got on there's daily video address, he didn't talk about it at all. It wasn't a thing. This was not a thing that was happening. And the Ministry of Defense also denied that this rumor was true. In fact, they said with the rumor mill going into overdrive, they said it was all false, denied all the reports. Now, there were multiple sources stating this, but I'll bet you if you actually ran back, you'd find that all their sources were the same person or persons, not individually. So they sourced journalist Roman Simbelyuk, RADA deputy Alexei Goncharenko, ex-deputy Borislav Beriza, as well as Interfax Ukraine and Censor.net. So all these sources all got the same information roughly at the same time, all published it, and yet it wasn't true. The presidential office and the Ministry of Defense denied those statements. The initial rumors seemed really dubious, but in the end, someone somewhere, according to Intel Crab, deliberately leaked the Zaluzhnyi rumor to the press on a mass scale. True or not, this was no accident. So, this was amplified by so many people, and I was watching this as it was coming out almost in real time. This has all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign item. That the call for that there was going to be something happening in the near future, just a little bit ahead of now. This is advanced information. This is the hot rumor that's coming out. Literally, this looks like a Russian disinformation campaign. However, the other possibility is Ukrainian internal issues there. I mean, some of the people that were forwarding this were, Ukrainian members of their parliament. But they're also questionable members of their parliament, people that have got pro-Russian stances. There's a lot of negative to look at on this one. But overall, the big news is that no, Zaluzhnyi is not being fired, at least as of this moment in time. It has been denied outright by all the people involved, probably as soon as they heard the rumor themselves. The other big bit of news that's come out in the last day or two, I'm going to see if I can bit back over here and move this up. A couple of days ago, in fact, it was yesterday, the Ukrainian SBU uncovered a corruption scandal in connection with an arms deal that totaled about $40 million embezzled in a fraudulent transaction. This is for artillery shells, and about 5 individuals were involved in it. The SBU found it, uncovered it, recovered the money, and then reported it up. The fact that it's being amplified so much, and I will tell you honestly, in certain circles, particularly those who are against support for Ukraine, it is being crowed about, but with no information that it was actually found by Ukraine, addressed by Ukraine, and that this was a successful anti-corruption takedown. Effectively, they're crowing that, oh, this is so corrupt here. They're working on rooting out this corruption. The U.S. is even sending over a group of inspectors, 3 inspectors from the U.S. Defense Department, to make sure their aid is getting into Kyiv and is getting distributed appropriately. The Defense Ministry has been going through and inspecting the enlistment offices, the food warehouses, all their facilities, and Rustem Umerov and his crew are finding all the corruption, rooting it out, finding all the mistakes, and they're making sure they're making it right. This is the type of thing that needs to be done here in the United States. Root out this corruption, pitch out the people doing it, and basically, top to bottom, if you are holding elected office on the federal level, you probably ought to be having an annual audit by third-party auditors that are not under the control of the federal government, that will actually audit everything without telling anybody, audit everybody's finances that are holding elected office, and then report the corruption they find. Because truly, corruption will result in the downfall of our nation. And Ukraine is doing their part to get rid of it. So that's the scoop on the auditing and the $40 million that's been circulating. So now that I've hit both of the big bits of false news, effectively, fake news that's been coming out about Ukraine, let's go ahead and move forward with Ukraine news itself. From President Zelensky, surpassing Russia in drone operations is one of the main tasks in 2024. In fact, from my understanding, that rather than artillery being the thing that's killed the most people, it's been drones are taking out 75% of the targets. Not artillery. Artillery is still vital on the battlefield. There's targets that can't be easily destroyed by a single drone or even a couple of drones. But overall, the real effective piece of equipment on the battlefield on both sides is drones. President Zelensky released personal financial declarations showing his income over 2022, and it shows that he has lost income. His cash flow fell by equivalent to $47,500. I'm assuming that comma is misplaced there, to 3.7 million hryvnias, or 97,706 in 2022 compared to 2021. And that's no surprise to me. He's in the middle of a war. He's not looking to fill his pockets. He's trying to get the basics for getting by. That's it. According to President Zelensky, again, today the strength of the Ukrainian army is 880,000 people. That would be 880,000 military personnel. He says they have a 1 million strong army. He says there's 30 million citizens, maybe even more, but he's not sure because he doesn't know exactly how many people immigrated in or out in the time frame. He added at the end, "We are grateful to those who returned to rebuild Ukraine, not just those who returned to fight." And this one was just an interesting aside. The GUR of the Ministry of Defense has received 10 brand new Mitsubishi pickups from the Army Competent Assistance Fund. They look good. I mean, they look like Mitsubishi pickup trucks. And I imagine they'll be effectively used by the GUR in order to carry out their operations. Now let's move over to news out of Russia. And by the way, if you're just joining me, please go ahead and pipe in. Let me know you're here because I love to know who's watching when they comes on through. Over in Yaroslavl, I take that back, the Ukrainians attempted to launch 3 drones at an oil facility. The 3 drones, I believe 2 of them were intercepted by regular air defenses and a third by electronic warfare. That's the one that appears to have fallen in a relatively intact fashion near this oil terminal. Interesting that Russia's managed to take it down. More interesting is that Ukraine is continuing to attack oil infrastructure in Russia. From the Defense Ministry of the UK, we've got another intelligence update. They're talking about the entire time that of this war, Russia has lost approximately 2,600 main battle tanks, 4,900 other combat vehicles, and they believe that they've lost 40% fewer vehicles in 2023 than 2022. That's because of the positional nature of the conflict in 2023 and because they've spent most of the year on a defensive posture. But since they have gone on the offense in eastern Ukraine, armored losses have increased for Russia, and they've likely lost just since they went on the offensive 365 MBTs and 700 armored combat vehicles. They think that Russia can generate approximately 100 MBTs a month and therefore retains the capacity to replace battlefield losses and continue this level of offensive activity for the foreseeable future. So it looks like Ukraine's going to have to step it up and make sure Russians are losing even more of their vehicles. Attacks on military enlistment offices have continued, and that's despite President Vladimir Putin's statement that they were not going to be doing another round of mobilization. That would, if they do another round of mobilization, it would be a contradiction of his promise that there would be no further mobilization. And these continuing attacks indicate there's probably not a lot of confidence in Vladimir Putin's promises. According to the director of the Institute of Strategic Research and Security, Russia is converting the Ukrainian regions they seize into an extensive military base, establishing military units and creating training grounds. I've seen it a couple of different times where it looks like Russia intends to create basically a depopulated zone in Ukraine, effectively depopulating the whole country as a buffer against NATO and the Western powers. But this would indicate they're planning to stick military forces in that area instead. Perhaps the first steps towards hostile actions towards NATO and the Western powers. Of Crimean partisans expose Russian missile systems protecting Sevastopol. That would be the harbor there. The interesting part, though, was the use. They've revealed that Russia is trying to use the BM-21 Grad to neutralize naval drones. Now, if you're not familiar with what the BM-21 Grad is, it's the truck with the whole bunch of tubes mounted to the back. They put a bunch of rockets in it, and then they launch like 40 of them at once. Not at once, but like in series in just a short order. It's an inaccurate area bombardment weapon is what it is. It's not targeted enough to truly neutralize drones on a regular basis. So the fact that they're basically getting down to using these Grad systems to try and stop naval drones is a mark of desperation. 2 more Russian bombs have fallen in the Belgorod region. One of them caused the evacuation of about 150 people. This is continuing a pattern we're seeing on a regular basis, where likely Russia's inability to maintain their vehicles and equipment and the exhaustion from a higher rate and pace of operations is causing them to make more mistakes and do these types of accidental drops. In a sign that Russia is trying to get every opportunity to build more military supplies, the governor of the Magadan region proposed weaving camouflage nets at polling stations. So come, cast your vote, make a camouflage net for the soldiers at the front. This was an interesting one, and I'm going to try and tread lightly on it. From Peskov here. He states, when asked whether President Putin would participate in debates before the Russian presidential elections, he stated, the president does not participate in pre-election debates. That indicates somebody who is not willing to face questioning about his actions, certainly not in public. And it reminds me of another presidential election currently going on, and I'll leave it there. I have to state this one has only a single source that I've been able to find, and it's a usually reliable source, but understand I don't have a good cross-confirmation on this one. According to Crimean Wind, a Su-24 disappeared on approach to Zaluzhnyi or Snake Island. The bomber has still not returned to Crimean airfields, which is well outside its loiter time, as far as I understand it. That could mean that another Russian Su-24 has gone down. It could mean that somebody has defected. It could mean a lot of interesting possibilities, but it also could be just an inaccurate bit of information. We talked a few weeks ago about Russia potentially building a tunnel under the Kerch Strait. Well, they're kind of saying that that's not going to happen. The Crimean Bridge, they say, is reliably protected, and the timing isn't right for it. They might do it in sections, but there's no point in building a duplicate facility at this point in time. With all the sanctions going on, Russia has lost $170 billion worth of exports. $170 billion worth of exports this last year. That's a 30% drop compared to the year before. I noted in one of my previous videos that the Russians had been turning off cellular service in a couple of different places deliberately, overnight hours. Well, there's theories that we're doing it to expand their electronic warfare capabilities. But more interesting is the statement that the insider making is that Ukrainian drones have been using the Russian cellular networks for a long time. Interesting to say the least. Russian Foreign Intelligence Service Director Sergei Narishkin has reiterated that the Kremlin is not interested in settlement short of complete eradication of the Ukrainian states. This is directly contrary to all of the messaging we've been seeing, stating that Russia was ready to negotiate. They were ready to come to the table. No, they're ready to come to the table only for Ukraine's complete and utter capitulation. In that same vein, Russian propagandist Simonian promised purges for Ukrainians in case Russia wins in Ukraine. As Anton Herashchenko states, their genocidal rhetoric is becoming more and more open. And I'm going to state this from my perspective. When somebody tells you who they are, it's best to believe them. Russia has been removing the wreckage of the IL-76 from the crash site. This is before they provided any evidence of 65 Ukrainian POWs being on board the flight. And we'll go over to the international front. The Netherlands has allocated an additional $132 million in military funding for Ukraine. This will be for ammunition supply, equipment, and cyber security. Kyiv and Budapest, Hungary have taken a powerful step towards meeting between Zelensky and Orban. The foreign ministers met just the other day and said that one of their desires was to set up a meeting between the two countries, the heads of them specifically. No date set, but it's set for, they say they want it as soon as possible. In the meantime, Vladimir Putin intends to make a stop in Turkey to discuss Ukraine. Turkey, as I recall, is a member of NATO, and aren't they? They may even be a signer of the International Criminal Court, which would mean that the arrest warrant would be valid there as well. That's something that'll be interesting to look into, but it may not be true. That said, Turkey's been sitting on the fence and trying to play both sides for quite a while. I'm not surprised. President Zelensky stated that Europe cannot support Ukraine without the United States. That's because Europe has Europe as a whole, the European Union, has a smaller GDP than the United States. They're already providing more of their GDP, gross domestic product, to the support of Ukraine than the United States is. Of course, the United States GDP is enormous. So, yeah, the Ukrainians lose out a lot if the U.S. doesn't put the support in there. A NATO general has said that the alliance must be prepared for potential Russian missile strikes in Europe. That would mean in the event of an all-out war with Russia, that Russia would absolutely start doing missile strikes on European positions. And they should be expecting it. The situation in Europe is getting increasingly tense. The European Union considered cutting off financial aid to Hungary over their Ukraine aid veto. That's in addition to actually cutting off their ability to vote if they would not back down on vetoing the military aid package for Ukraine. One of the things about Hungary and Ukraine is they're going to finally resolve the dispute with Hungary over the rights of national minorities. This has been, I'm going to call it a red herring. It's something that Hungary has used as a kind of a false reason to attack Ukraine and to not be on their side. Viktor Orban tends to be on Russia's side anyway, so if they can resolve this in a way that is acceptable to all relevant sides, it will give Hungary one less reason, one less excuse to go against Ukraine aid. The Rheinmetall Group is going to build a new ammunition production plant in Germany. They're going to supply these projectiles to Ukraine as well as other people that request them. The thing that was interesting, though, in other articles, that used to take about a decade to get one of these facilities built and approved, all the necessary requirements. They say they're going to do it in a few months instead. This is an interesting one right here, though not directly related to the war in Ukraine. A car drove into a security post of the Russian embassy in Seoul. The SUV crashed into the security post in front of the Russian embassy in South Korea on the evening of the 28th. A policeman on duty was seriously injured. But they note, according to preliminary data, the driver was sober. They're now looking into the reasons for the accident and trying to determine whether it was, in fact, an accident. Greece has approved the transfer of Soviet-style weapon systems to Ukraine, particularly their air defense systems. Now, they do have a variety of Soviet-era air defense systems, including Tor, Osa, and S-300, and the Zu-23-2, which is basically a turret on the back of a truck. I think it might actually be a tracked vehicle, but it's a turret with a couple of machine guns and a radar. So, we don't know exactly what all is actually going to be transferred to Ukraine, but I've seen several other sources have said all of their Soviet-era air defense systems are being moved. Don't know for sure, just interesting. An interesting aside came out. The FSB recruited a member of parliament from Latvia over 20 years ago to work as an agent for them. And she was just outed just recently. That'd be Tatiana Zkhadenova, which I'm sure I butchered the pronunciation multiple times. She's been an agent of Russian intelligence for at least 20 years, according to the emails they obtained between her and her FSB handlers. The interesting part is that she is in elected office and has been working on behalf of Russia. This is something that all of us are going to have to pay special attention on. And I'm going to briefly delve into U.S. politics in the same vein there. Those who are in the United States will know of Ilhan Omar. She gave a speech where she said that she was in the U.S. House of Representatives representing Somalia, Somali people, and Somalian interests. She never ever said that she was representing U.S. or American interests. So we're looking at a similar situation there, although I believe Ilhan Omar is herself a true believer rather than necessarily an FSB or agent of another government directly. That said, we need to be looking at who our elected officials are actually serving. Do they serve us, the people? Or are they serving two masters? One of the leading leaders of the Romanian party AUR, that's a right-wing party, they say, has called on Romania to annex 4 areas of Ukraine. And this whole group here, this party, is actually very much pro-Russian, and they figure that if Russia's going to take take Ukraine, they might as well get their own. India has started saying no to Russian arms and equipment. They still will buy certain amounts of Russian oil if they can buy it with rupees. But they don't want Russian hardware anymore. They don't want their tanks or planes. Instead, they're going to other suppliers, such as the United States and other countries. They're also working on their own domestic arms industry, which is a major change for India. But they gotta watch how they're doing it. The Russian weapons are being shunned by them, but they cannot afford to drive Russia into the open arms of China. That whole situation over there is a difficult one, with India being a major regional power, but they're always at odds with China, another major regional and almost world power. So the two have been at each other's throats multiple times. In fact, India is going to, in the next 20 years, I believe, is going to have a greater population than China. So they're looking at their own future. They're looking at this situation. Then they don't want Russia in the arms of the Chinese. And that's the situation on the international front. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. But before I do, are there any questions? I'll be watching for questions. Absolutely chime in and let me know. In the meantime, we do have some pretty interesting news going on. There's some real changes happening. The Russians reported capturing Tabaivka near Kupiansk. The Russians only had occupation of it for less than 12 hours because the Russians have been kicked back out of the area. Here's the map that they originally reported as having taken. But it didn't take, well, hold on, let me go see if I can find it here. Gotta find it. Bear with me a second. Nope, okay, I don't remember where it is. But basically, oh, that's right, I got these backwards. But the Ukrainians have definitely taken it back, and the whole area is now in what they call the Gray Zone. Avdiivka, I mentioned in a previous video that the Russians appeared to be overextending themselves quite extensively. And let me kind of quickly draw something up here. They had expanded their front into this area right here, resulting in a situation that looked like the Ukrainians could easily lop them off with a little bit of side work here or here. Well, that whole situation has very much changed. The Ukrainian forces have counterattacked and pushed their Russian forces back. No real good information here, but they do have, the Russians have basically been stopped, if not entirely kicked back to their original starting lines. Over in the Crimea area, the Russians have been stepping up their attacks, but no sign of actual changes in the lines. And Novomikhailivka, this looks like they've added some additional area to the Russians' holdings here. I believe this probably happened a few days to a week ago, and just we're now getting this confirmed. Prut, which was very active in, I think, the June timeframe of last year, had gone pretty much dead silent. Well, the Russians have made some advances in the last day or so. They've basically managed to take a little bit of territory right there north of Prut once again. This one has only reported by War Mapper, so I don't have good confirmations on this one. But War Mapper reports that over near New York and Horlivka, the Ukrainians have taken a Russian trench line that was there previous to 2022. This is 3 kilometers south of the previous Ukrainian crossing into the pre-2022 occupied areas. Again, I don't have double confirmation on this one. All the information I generally provide, I try and get at least 2 sources that I can reliably trust. When I have only one, I want to make sure you know, because there's always the possibility that that information may be countered in the very next video. And this is coming from Supernova Plus. The armed forces of Ukraine, in this case, now have a lot of night FPVs in the Kherson-Zaporizhia directions. The hunt is being conducted for all equipment over 8 nights. Be careful. That's right. The Russians are now looking at a situation where even at night, those FPV drones may be breathing down their necks over in the Kherson, which is where the Dnipro River is, and Zaporizhia areas. Speaking of the Dnipro River, let's move over there. There is reports, and the reports are coming directly from the armed forces of Ukraine, that they have expanded their foothold on the Dnipro River. I mentioned in a previous video, just in the last few days, that the Ukrainians have been effectively shelling much of the area, all across that area of the Dnipro River, hitting Oleshki to Kozachi Laheri and several other areas across the Dnipro River, and they were shelling them heavily. Well, the Ukrainian spokesman has stated that our work has results with the expansion of the bridgeheads. But we must realize that the front remains flexible. There are many more enemies on the left bank. No details on exactly what was taken, not taken, or any changes to the front lines on the Dnipro River. But overall, that indicates, usually when Ukraine reports something like this, it indicates that there is a significant change that they have taken, and they are not wanting to give away exactly what just yet. And that's the situation on the front lines. I'm going to go into some interesting extras here, so let's go ahead and get things set up for that. This Russian repair shop for heavy military vehicles has been struck by Ukrainian missiles. That's according to sources. 6 Russians were injured in the strike, but the time and location was not provided. We can see that there is some of the people, when they breathe, they're seeing fog coming out of their mouths or condensation. So that would indicate it is winter. No snow on the ground, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But especially since this was mostly showing inside, what should have been an inside shot here. Interesting is what I'm going to call it. In a sadder note, and I'm going to file this under the human cost of war. A Russian engineer killed himself after a rocket he designed killed his grandmother in Kharkiv. He left a note and said he couldn't live with it, adding, "What is happening now is a horror and a nightmare." I realize he worked for the Russians, but there's going to be a lot of mental illness after this war is over. Slightly more fun on this one, I guess you might say. This Russian Kamaz truck was very lucky. A Ukrainian FPV drone got stuck in the windshield. And here it is from the other perspective. That's how close this guy got to not having a truck and not having his life anymore. From journalist Jason J. Smart. Those worried about an escalation after Jordan don't understand that Russia invading Ukraine was the escalation. By Jordan, he's referring to the killing of 3 U.S. servicemen, and that I believe is called Tower 22 on at a base on the Jordan-Iraqi border. The escalation has already happened. And whether we as a nation or the Western world as a whole will admit it, our enemies know they're at war. Do we? Senator Mark Warner issued a statement saying, "Let me be clear. Walking away from Ukraine now would be a mistake of historic proportions." And it would be, because if we walk away from Ukraine, there is no country on earth that will believe us when we say that we're their ally. Who would take the risk? Now into a little bit lighter stuff here. The patch on this man's chest here says, "Daddy, you are my hero." The men that go to fight in this war are leaving behind everything, in hopes they'll be able to return to a free everything when they get back. And we'll end off with a little bit of just kind of watching this video of cats from the defense of Ukraine. All these cats are a vital part of Ukraine's army. And this is one of the things that I think is wonderful. How much the Ukrainian soldiers care for their animals. Their cats, their dogs, everybody. They care. It's the sign of a good soul. And that's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions real quick, I've got about 20 seconds or so. I'll pause here, but not going to be hanging on long. I just want you to know that I do appreciate you joining me today. Give me that thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. I do appreciate it, and it does help me out. Subscribe if you don't want to miss my updates, though I understand I'm putting them out as best I can on the times I can, so the live streams will happen when I'm able to put them up there. You have a great rest of your day, and I see no questions. We'll see you on the next video.